there? Please let me know. Hello? Hi, am I live? Oh, it looks like I am. Anyone in there? Oh, there we go. All right. Very good. As usual, me showing my incredible technical expertise on these matters. Let's see if I do that. Is that better? There we go. As long as it doesn't fall down or something. All right, well, let's give people a few minutes to show up, because right now we're only at about 15. I don't know how many are going to show up for this, because I mean it's January 1st, right? But I figured, why not? I had nothing else to do today, so I mean it was this or continue to study details of the rituals of the Bonpo shamans of the Kunlun Mountains. So I decided to take a little break from that. How's everyone doing? I hope everybody had a good Christmas and New Year's. Happy New Year's to everybody. Oh my. Got a bit of ash in me. There we go. Right, so today we're going to be talking about whatever it is you guys really want to talk about. If you guys don't come up with any subjects, then maybe I'll give you guys a sneak preview as my most loyal viewers who come in even on the 1st of January to do it. To what is going to be the content of the upcoming issues of the Pundit Files series. The continuation in a way of Pundit Presents. Though Pundit Presents is also still being printed, so there we are. But we'll see. Let's see what people are saying in the chat right now. Wayne Brack says, I'm just here for the naughty cat culture. I'm not sure what naughty cat culture you're. Meatball is many things, but she's not really typically a naughty cat. Funny story. You guys want to hear a funny Meatball story? Well, not funny, but it's kind of cute, actually, I guess would be the right term for it. So here in South America, right, you got to keep in mind that the holidays are happening not in the middle of winter, but at the peak of summer. And as a result, the culture becomes quite different, you know, from the Christmas and New Year's kind of thing over there. By over there, I mean in the Northern Hemisphere. But one of the things is that, of course, people have huge parties, and usually those are barbecues of different kinds. And then at midnight on both New Year's Eve on both Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, at midnight, there is a huge fireworks display. The one on New Year's is bigger than the one on Christmas, but there's always one on Christmas as well, right? So naturally, obviously, dogs and cats sometimes have a hard time with that. And Meatball, when she and her sister Big Chungus were very little, like the first couple of times that they went through it, they were absolutely terrified. Like I remember that somehow Big Chungus, who's a large cat, right, like managed to hide herself under the washing machine, yeah, the clothes washer, and somehow squeezed back there, right, because I couldn't find her anywhere. And then suddenly I see that she's there, right? I couldn't believe she even fit herself in there. So she must have been quite freaked out. Now, of course, Meatball is now on her 13th year, so she's not as terrified anymore, right? But she still gets very nervous. So usually when this is one of the reasons why New Year's Eve I go out for Christmas because it's less fireworks and stuff, but for New Year's Eve I stay at home. So that Meatball wouldn't be alone with all that noise. Though I'm sure she'd be fine anyway. But so naturally, when the fireworks were going, she was quite frightened, but she didn't go running and hiding somewhere. Instead, she stayed like next to me wherever I was. Right, and at the time, I was doing a bit of cleaning up at first, and then I go upstairs, and I come here. I've got a desk in front of me. There's a desk where my computer is, my desktop, and everything. And so she went under the desk and spent all this time there, right? And now, after that, you could tell that she was still that she was still nervous from the fires. It was quite a big display this time, because I think like last year it had rained or something, and so there wasn't very much. But this time there was a lot. And this isn't like, in a North American city hall will have fireworks. They'll put fireworks up there, and in one specific area in a safe zone over a park or over a river or whatever, or a city hall. And that's it. Those are the only fireworks that are allowed, right? In Uruguay, everybody has fireworks. The city doesn't do it. People do. There are people that spend hundreds of dollars on fireworks, and then they launch them from the street corner of their house, right? So there's fireworks coming out everywhere and in all directions. It's not a controlled. It's not a controlled and programmed affair. So that means that the fireworks start usually at around 11, and they sometimes don't end until after 1 a.m. So anyways, eventually they stopped, and I went to bed. And one of the things that have to be pointed out is that Meatball, she's never been a cat that sleeps on the bed, right? Chungus used to do that a little more often, but Meatball typically doesn't, very rarely. The only time she usually does that is if it's incredibly cold at night, by Uruguayan standards, which means it's just slightly above freezing, because it never gets below freezing here. But last night I go to bed, and then the next thing you know, Meatball climbs onto the bed, and then she climbs literally on top of me and sits down there. And I think she spent all night there, so it was, she was very clearly still concerned by the fireworks. But I mean, she's fine. She's fine now. She's outside now, I think. So anyways, that's my Meatball New Year's story, for those who asked how Meatball did with New Year's. Let's see here. What are you guys talking about besides that? How is Meatball? So we've covered that one. Judd Goswick says, do you plan to revisit Lords of Olympus at some point? I really like that game. Well, I actually, Lords of Olympus, I sold the rights to it to Presses Intermedia. It is a great game, don't get me wrong, and I quite like it. But it was never a huge moneymaker, right? There's a dedicated fandom of it. Like there are certain people who still play it, some of them because they were Amber Diceless fans, some of them, because they really love the Greek drama and what have you, But so I probably won't ever do anything else for Lords of Olympus, because it's not a game I own anymore, right? But you never know. I might do, I don't know, I might do another version of something like that with the diceless rules. But I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, I'm mostly doing OSR stuff now. Point Blank says the Pundit Files should have a trailer with the Rockford Files theme music. I like that. Well, I am a huge fan of the Rockford Files, even though I was a little young to be watching it when it first aired, but I caught the reruns, as a kid, and I've always thought that was a great show. Wimbrack says, will WotC survive Ryan Lynn? Is there something about Ryan Lynn that I don't know about that I have not yet been informed? What is it about Ryan Lynn? I guess someone will have to explain that one to me because I'm not seeing it here. Is he a Magic guy? Magic the Gathering guy? Anyway, sorry, I don't know, Wayne. I don't know anything about that. Osiris says, how can they be very good? It has no dice. Well, you'd have to try it to find out. JKD Buck says, I had a mountain cur that was scared to death of fireworks. My golden doodle isn't scared one bit, very chill dog. Yeah, some dogs are just fine with it. Like Bill the Elf's dog, Benito, he doesn't get freaked out by the fireworks at all. Like, but he does like go and very excitedly look at them. It's quite funny. I think it brings him visions of glory and conquest or something, you know. Cairo says, what makes a hero a hero? Is that a topic that you're suggesting for tonight? Well, that would be an interesting topic. I don't know what everybody else thinks. Is that a topic you want to talk about? Bone Hoover says, Boone Flyers. I don't know where I got that. Fire departments must get really nervous down there. Yes, I think they do. I know that people die every year. I don't know what they're thinking, but they do it. Dark Wielder says, your thoughts on the late Bronze Age collapse, but a space opera. Any advice where to start? Any pitfalls to avoid? Oh, that's funny. That's very funny that you'd say that, Dark Wielder. Have you been? Do I know you? Are you one of my players that I've possibly mentioned this to? Jesus, or is it just a weird coincidence? But essentially, you know, for a while now, I've been thinking of trying to make a setting. Just a sec. I'm going to try to find a pipe I can actually smoke here. There we go. All right. So I was trying to find a setting to make a setting book for Star Adventurer. Star Adventurer, in case anybody here doesn't know, is my very basic, very inexpensive OSR space opera RPG. And you can buy that on drive-thru. The links are on the description. You can buy that on drive-thru for like $9.99 in print, and it's less in PDF, obviously. And everybody who's bought it has been super nice about it because they all agree that it's an incredible product because it's only, I think, like 36 pages long, and it's a complete game, and it gives you everything you need. It doesn't have any setting though, right? But I mean, it has all the tools for the DM to make their own setting. So you can pick the type of aliens you want to have and the type of careers and stuff, and you can set things up, and there are variable rules of how you could do things like starships and space battles because whether you have hyperdrive or you don't have hyperdrive or whatever, right? So for a long time, I've thought about doing a setting for Star Adventure, and basically, you've just kind of named the inspiration for what I was thinking of for that setting. Geez, what was I calling it again? Oh, the Sons of Heaven. Yeah, that's what I'm calling it. The Sons of Heaven. But I've been trying to work on it, and it's just very hard for me. I'm trying to do like I get a bit caught in like the element of the you have to have this kind of vast epic timeline, right? And if you've got it with humans and you're doing, I mean, there are two ways to go, right? Like you could do it like, oh, this was a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, right? Or you could do it, this is in the future, right? But if you're looking at something simulating the late Bronze Age collapse, which was literally, I was like, one of my core inspirations for this. If you're going with something like that, then you need to have a very lengthy history, right? Because there has to be at least a few thousand years before that of development. And then you have to come into the idea of like, what was the cause of that collapse? So I don't know, Dark Wielder, maybe you'll have this book out before I do. Right now, there's no project for, like, it's not like, oh, I'm writing it now. There are several big books that I've thought about potentially doing after Baptism of Fire. But I have not yet been able to like come up with a coherent structure for how I want to do any of them. Maybe you guys want to hear more about my potential future products and then tell me which one you'd find the most interesting. Let me see what else we've got in the comments here. We got 53 people watching. Well, that's pretty good. I mean, that's about half of what we've been usually getting lately. But I mean, I'd expect that because it's a vacation day and a lot of people are probably hungover still, and or recovering in other ways. And I wasn't I didn't know, honestly. I thought the evening of the 1st of January 2024, how many people could come in, right? So I thought I might get 20 viewers. I thought I might get 100. I don't know, maybe more. Maybe it would have been more people that came when it's the tail end of a vacation day. But I guess what we've got is about 57. So that's good. It's good. That's good intel. It's good to know. Ian Isle says, I'm lucky I'm too old to have gotten into card games. Well, you must be a bit older than me because, I was actually probably around I wasn't a teenager anymore, obviously, right? But I was still in college, if I'm remembering correctly. Of course, I did spend longer in college than most people. When Magic the Gathering first came out, I don't remember the exact year it came out, but I know that a lot of my friends who were in college, they got massively into it, right? And I tried, I played it a little, and I was like, oh, I don't like this. I like RPGs. If I want to play cards, I'll play 5-card stud, or I'll play Uno, but I'm not going to play some weirdo wizard duel game, It just seemed there's too much stuff going on. I don't like, I've come to realize over the years, because part of me thinks I should like these really complex, strategy games, or, these German, mathematics designed Euro games, or super complex war games, like miniature war games or chit war games, whichever. And honestly, most of them I don't. I think most of them are the design is way too complex. And it's essentially made for, I don't know, autistic minds, I guess. It's made for hyper nerds, right? And so I can understand how for those people it would be super appealing, and then for other people it's not going to be. And it's not obviously not a question of IQ or something like that, because a lot of these kind of nerds are not particularly smart, and then there are a lot of smart people that don't have that particular type of neurodivergence, to use the term, So it's just so there are war games I do like, Memoir 44, for example, is probably the perfect, it's the ideal design balance of what it takes for a war game. It's just enough elements of simulation of a real battle, of strategy, without having an overwhelming number of unnecessary rules, basically. And without having so many different strategic variants that you can't actually plan, all right. So anyways, that's all I have to say about Magic. This is really turning out to be a very eclectic live stream so far. Maybe we'll settle on a single topic soon. Timothy Shanks. Timothy Shanks. Oh my God. Timothy Shanks says late Bronze Age collapse circa 1200 BC. Try Jews in Space from Mel Brooks' History of the World Part 1. Yeah. Okay. This is now getting weird, right? I must have let in some genie somewhere that I forgot to rebottle or something, because first the other guy posts about late Bronze Age collapse as a space opera, which was exactly what I had thought of doing. And now Timothy mentions Jews in Space from the famous Mel Brooks History of the World, and your guys aren't going to believe me about this, but that was the thing that inspired me, because they came out with this series a little while ago that it's like History World Part 2, right? The sequel, which is obviously not nearly as good as the original movie. So then I watched that and I was like, this isn't as good as the original movie, right? And I wanted to, I hadn't seen the original movie in probably like more than 20 years. So I said, I better see this just to be sure. Maybe it was just as bad, the original movie, but I watched it. The original movie's great. Mel Brooks, he's amazing. And I watch the Jews in Space bit, right? Which is just a short piece that they have in there. It's like, I think if I'm remembering right now, that it's like promised that that's going to be part of the History of the World Part 2 sequel movie, right? That they never ended up doing. And that's the moment that I thought, oh, you know what? What if we did something like that, for a Star Adventure, So there we have it. It's like weird things happen at the turn of the year, I guess. Timothy Jenks says, I liked Amber Diceless RPG. Well, if you liked Amber Diceless, you'd like Lords of Olympus. Osiris says, I got Lion and Dragon. I hope you're enjoying it, Osiris. Please let us all know. Ian Isles says, Magic the card game is intensely boring to me. Yeah, me too. JKD Buck 76 says, Pundit, I had a co-worker in Calgary whose voice sounded 100% like yours. Now that I see you, I know you're actually not him. Uncanny how your voice is like, well, but are you from Alberta, JKD Buck? Because maybe it's just the Albertan. Like, Alberta does have a distinctive accent. Albertans don't think of themselves as having an accent, but there is a particular accent, which is not so much in the form of a different tone to, like an accent in the same sense of, say, a Latino Spanish accent or a Chinese accent or something like that, or what have you, but a different mannerism in the speech and certain elements of the very minor changes in the pronunciation of words that is noticeable, right? And so this is why sometimes people I've met who aren't Albertan will mention, for example, that I sound like Jordan Peterson, even though I don't really, right? Like, I don't have that I don't have the Kermit the Frog voice in particular, but we come from exactly the same place, right? And so we do have the exact same accent, right? The exact same dialect, I guess you could say, of particular Western Canadian English, which is the Albertan dialect. So it might just be that. Climbing That Mountain says, WotC will have to be pried out of Hasbro's cold undead hands. Well, yeah, probably. A lot of people keep insisting, oh, no, they're going to sell. Well, look, there is one thing that could happen, which is that investors in Hasbro might insist that WotC be branched off into a separate corporation. Because right now, at least as of like the previous quarter, almost all the money that Hasbro is making is from Wizards of the Coast. And basically Hasbro is dragging down what could be the value of an independent Wizards of the Coast company. At least that's what it looks like right now, right? Because in fact, Magic and D&D have continued to be popular for a lot longer than anything Hasbro has been doing apart from that. But if you look at this last quarter, that's an illusion now, right? Like, everything that they've made for money is because of Baldur's Gate 3. It's not because of anything that Wizards itself is producing. Okay, it's just because they managed to license out D&D to Larian, and Larian made all the money. Now, if stockholders feel like they would still do better being stockholders of Wizards of the Coast and not in Hasbro, they could try to force. Now, this already happened once before. There was an attempt to force Hasbro's board to branch off and to have two separate companies, right? Hasbro and Wizards. And the vote failed. They lost, But they might try that again. But other than that, there is no other way. But it doesn't matter because one way or the other, both Hasbro and WotC are going broke. And they're going to be run into the ground, apparently. So after that, who knows? The thing is, how dead can a company get when it's worth billions and billions of dollars? Because they can have terrible years, but they could have ages of terrible years unless there's some kind of a project, like some gigantic, massive project that outdoes everything else in their package, right? In how much they're making from all the little crappy toys that they're selling or whatever. And that catastrophically fails, right? They make a gigantic investment beyond the value of the rest of the company that fails. I don't see how they could ever actually go broke. They could be doing terribly badly, right? And if they're doing terribly badly, well, they could keep being that way. They could keep being really bad for a very long time, right? Like if we're just hoping that Hasbro or Wizards are going to organically die out because of their bad corporate decisions, you're underestimating the size of this enormous multinational corporation. They can have the ability to continue losing money like this for quite possibly another 10 or 20 years at least, right? So they could be a crap company for a very, very long time. And before that, I would imagine that there would be some other desperate measures that could happen, like corporate takeovers or things like that. Osiris says, how do you make mechanics for a sandbox? I want to make something to make running overworld mechanics easier. Osiris, by mechanics, I am assuming that you kind of mean like running events, encounters, and adventures in overland travel. Is that about right, would you say? Let's see if you answer while I light my pipe again here. Anything, Osiris? All right, well, I'm going to assume that was what you were asking about. So here's the deal. You rock punting. Oh, thank you, Retro Roy. Keep fighting a good fight. Well, I appreciate that. Remember, if you want to support me in fighting the good fight, then be sure to check out all my products. There's links in the description to this very live stream, if you can open it up. And I'm always welcome to receiving Patreon money for a Patreon that doesn't give you anything, right? But if you bought all my books, or you just don't want to buy any of my books but you want to support me, there's the Patreon thing. Or now there's super chats. We're on a live stream right now. Super chats are very welcome. Now, I don't only read comments, as you can see, from people who give super chats. But if you do give a super chat, I pretty much will have to read what you out loud what you've said, unless it's something that'll get me in trouble. So there we are. But okay, well, to answer Osiris's question, how do we make mechanics for sandbox? So I think, Osiris, if you check, even in Lion and Dragon, you can find some example of that. Now, remember, Lion and Dragon is a rule book. It's not a setting book, so it doesn't have as much as some of the other stuff. And I've continued to work on kind of trying to expand the qualities of how to easily run a sandbox overland game. Now, give me 1 second. I'm going to grab got some books down here. So in Lion and Dragon, if you go to the very back, at the back you have a section for handling court cases, and then after that you have a section on Wilderland adventuring. Okay, and in that section there are some random rolls. They're basically just encounter tables, right? Random encounters in the Wilderlands. And, that's one part. That's number one, is essentially you've got to rely on generators, right? Because if you're doing a sandbox, I mean, you can have groups in the world that are around there. You should know what's there, first of all, in the setting, and look around in the setting of what would those groups be doing in regards to the presence of the player characters being there. But beyond that, you should be very careful to be sure to add an X factor, which is just not what you're thinking up in your head like it was a novel, right? And that's where things like encounter tables come in. So beyond the encounter tables, there's a thing called settled wilderland areas. So you're out there in the wilderlands, in the middle of the lands of the mountains and the forests, but there are going to be people living in some of these places, right? So there's a table here where you will roll to see what little tiny settlement you find in the middle of this wild, okay? And in that wild place, you want to roll to see who the ruler is, right? And so depending on who you get as the ruler of that little community, that's going to immediately affect what it's like, right? So it could be run by brigands, it could be run by a hermit, it could be run by a minor lord, it could be a monastery with an abbot. It might even be a place that doesn't have any real rulers, just kind of run by the village elders, right? And then you have to see about different possibilities based on those. In the generator, I mentioned things. So like, for example, a knight or a lord will rule from an old manor or a small old style keep. A hermit will usually live in a hovel, but might live in a ruined church. A magister, witch, or wizard might live in a hovel, a tower, or possibly an old manor. In some cases, there's mentions of a chaos cultist. So anyone who serves chaos is obviously motivated by their cultism. See the Cults of Chaos sourcebook. Then there's a check for ruler's disposition. How are they going to react to the PCs when the PCs arrive in their little community? And this can be, hostile. The ruler is up to something nefarious or just mad with paranoia. We'll see any outsider as a threat, or highly distrustful, or distrustful, cold to outsiders, will wish for them to leave as quickly as possible. That's one of the most likely checks. Bad intentions, the ruler needs something and wants to use the PCs. Neutral, good intentions. Friendly, too friendly. Too friendly, it's like, I want you to stay and marry my daughter so that we'll rule together, or something like that, right? And then there's checks for like the local economy, and there's a D20 table of local interesting details. I later expanded that in one of the Pundit Presents books, RPG, I forget what number it is. It's RPG Pundit Presents somewhere above the 50s, I'm pretty sure. Oh, there we go. Pundit Presents 82 100 Strange Features of Local Towns, right? So I made that a D100 table. So basically, the big part of doing a sandbox is making use of those kind of generators. Now, the ones that are there in Lion and Dragon are still fairly simple in comparison. And, a Dark Albion, there's more of it. But I have been learning myself as I go along, right, of how to make it better and better. And so every setting book I do is a better generator for doing a sandbox system with. And so if you look at Sword and Caravan, here suddenly you get into like a whole other level, because you go to Sword and Caravan. So Sword and Caravan starts with the whole gazetteer. It describes to you all of the regions of the Silk Road and the cities. There's lots and lots of historical detail and stuff that any good DM reading it will say, oh, see, that's stuff that would be like really interesting, right? That would be like potential, adventure cues, right? And that's all good. And there's, some new classes and monsters, and then there's the section on equipment. And then you get to the section called Encounters Along the Road. And Encounters Along the Road gives you basically the whole thing you need to do for the purpose of doing travel along the Silk Road as an OSR sandbox. And this is like in the little Wilderlands source book, which is where I've added the encounter tables for wilderness areas. I also have here a listed point-by-point procedure, right? So if you want to run, for example, a sandbox in the setting of Sword and Caravan, a sandbox-style campaign, this is basically your guide, right? It's all you need. Example of procedures for daily travel. So you're going on the road.
every day that you're on the road, you roll in the basic road encounters table on page 129. And that'll tell you what possible basic encounter you might have. You might have no encounter apart from local peasants. You might have a merchant caravan that crosses your way. You might have a weather encounter, or you might have a special encounter. If you get a special encounter, you roll on the special encounters table. The special encounters table is the more interesting stuff, and it's only you get a special encounter in 1 every 5 times. Basically, you roll on the table and on the basic encounter, and that could be all kinds of stuff. It could be a battle. It could be bureaucrats in the local kingdom that might wonder what you're doing. You might meet a djinn. It's really funny in my Sword and Caravan campaign, which is an absolute 100% sandbox. The player characters are constantly running into djinns, and they're not that easy to get. I mean, a djinn for example, in the special road encounter table is only a 2% chance out of that 20% chance of getting onto the special encounter table to begin with, and yet they've run into tons of them. So I think that they're, to the point that I've created this whole kind of side storyline about why they keep running into them. It has to do with a bottle that they once found that is actually a gin bottle. You might find lepers. You might find supernatural monster encounters. So there you would check to see what kind of possible monsters from the region are there, which you can do in Wilderlands or just by using a bit of your own criteria. A noble entourage, undead, a hermit, religious pilgrims, a sage or magister, a Sufi master, soldiers of the local ruler, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, a mysterious stranger. And you get all of the details of the type of encounter are there. And almost all of this is just like going to be like, it's going to make it all organic, right? Like you're running those things, okay? So, and every day you do one check while you're traveling along the road. Now, when you get to the end of the road, or like at the end of your day's travel, there may be a caravanserai along the road, right? These are like coaching inns, right? And if you want, you could just have your player characters go to sleep there, or you could go to the back to random caravanserai's table, and there, again, you roll to see who you might run into there. And so there's about a 70% chance that there's only the typical clients, right? The merchants and caravan workers that are staying there the night. But there's a 30% chance there might be someone special. So you might run into the special person might just be like a professional cook, which maybe your party will want to hire, or an artisan or something like that. It might be a barber surgeon who is there, plying his wares. But it also could be like a bandit who is pretending to be a potential hireling in order to make a mark for his bandit gang to then attack people. It might be a magician or a professional astrologer or something like that. It might be that magician might be a fraud, or he might not be. It could be a professional gambler who might want to take all your money, right? There's a lot of stuff. It could be a cleric or a Sufi. There could be missions, right? And there is a table of what are basically the Caravan Tales table, a D100 table, that is all about potential rumors that the player characters might hear at the caravanserai, which might lead to an adventure seed. So all of that sort of stuff is, of great potential. Going back again to the Wilderlands book, it says, well, if you're in a city, you could check the city encounters table. And in fact, first, what you should check in Sword and Caravan is the events in cities regions table. So every time you're approaching a city, the DM can check ahead of time to see if there was some important event that happened or is happening in that city. And the player characters might even hear about it when they're like at the city over. So they kind of might know it's already what's going on, or they might not find out until they're a lot closer or until they get there. Once they get there, that event is going to be, there could be all kinds of stuff that could be happening. There could be plague in the city. There could be a religious festival. There could be a flood. There could be a corrupt governor that is causing trouble. There could have been a recent fire. There might be bandit activity around the city. And then inside the city, there's a daytime and nighttime encounter table, which is, not unlike the ones that you see in the first edition AD&D DMG, of people and things dangerous or non-dangerous you could encounter. There's also a special missions table, because some of these people might be patrons and they might want to ask you to do something, right? So, you might get somebody in the city, they'll hire your characters to engage in theft or join an expedition or a raiding party or fight in a wrestling arena or kill someone for their employer, or be a bodyguard, all kinds of opportunities. And again, all of that is detailed in the book. And then I also have unwanted attention. These are every one of these things I'm mentioning right now are things that allow you to run an almost effortless sandbox without having to craft adventures in your head. You have to learn how to look at the results of what you're getting and mold that into adventure cues, which the player characters will then organically follow or not. You have to learn basically how to improv rather than try to write your epic saga or something like that, right? So the unwanted attention table means you spend too much time in a certain city. Depending on how weird you are and how you're behaving, there's a chance that the authorities will take an interest and look at you. And they might look well on you, or they might look poorly, right? So you might get kicked out, or worse. You could even get royal attention, which is another table that's there. So basically, that's the way you manage a sandbox in a system. And in a lot of times, as a DM, you might have to create that, right? If you're not running a game or a game setting where the designer has allowed you the tools you need for this, right? And I mean, I'm not the only one that does this, of course, right? Venger tries, God help him, but a lot of times his random tables are too short, right? But for example, Kevin Crawford is a master at this too, right? Like he's really, really good, to the point that up until Sword and Caravan, I don't think my world design tools, my world design is really good, right? My world design tools for the purpose of sandbox play were not as good as his until now. Like I don't know. I haven't seen his last couple of books. Maybe he's still improving too, and he might still be better than me. But I think Sword and Caravan, for example, and I mean, I know this because I've been running it, like I'm never thinking of what I'm doing in the as in, I'm not thinking of an adventure. I'm not saying, oh, well, in this adventure, they're going to go on this quest. No, I'm running the thing and it's just happening, right? And it's happening because I'm using the tables, and as well as the tables, you have to keep a careful measurement of time, right? You have to know what year it is in the setting, what day it is, and how things are progressing in the rest of the world of the setting. And so if you're running a historical setting, that helps because there's already a timeline that is going to develop, right? Like the player characters arrived, for example, in the Seljuk Turkish lands almost exactly when the vizier Kizil Arslan he dies. He's murdered by his own wife, right? Which is the kickoff to the start of what will be a civil war in the Seljuk lands. And so that was a nice coincidence, and it keyed into everything that the player characters were doing, right? Because they had to then get out of the capital quick. So they headed off to the next city. They headed off to Ray. Along the way, they ran into some genies, but that's incidental. Along the way, they also decided they had a plan. They had learned about what was going on in the Seljuk lands. They knew that the real ruler, the 23-year-old Sultan Togrul III, was basically just a prisoner in a palace somewhere in the north. And they said, well, if we go and rescue him and if we get him out, because the evil vizier is dead right now, and his widow and his widow's sons are going to just try to take over. But if at this moment someone frees the guy, then it'll be that he might be able to take command, and then he'll reward us, right? And so they were really planning on this. And of course, historically, there were two guys who are like the closest freaking thing to adventurers you could imagine. Like they could be in a D&D book, but they really existed in history. And that was Kamal ad-Din and Mahmud Anasoglu. Kamal ad-Din was a former bureaucrat of the Seljuks at the time of this last sultan that I named, at the time of his grandfather. who, when his grandfather died, his father took over and tried to rebel against the father of the vizier that I just mentioned. Mahmud was, Kamal was his, the advisor of the Sultan. He was on the side of the Sultan, right? But then eventually the Sultan stopped listening to him because he didn't like being criticized, because this guy would criticize him. And he had him fired and imprisoned. And then shortly after that, the Sultan was defeated in battle. He was killed, and his son became the Sultan, but as a prisoner, right, of the evil viziers, you know, as it were. This is where the whole deal of like the vizier is the bad guy comes from. This is actually the history of it right there. The evil vizier who imprisons the true king and essentially runs everything, and the true king is just a puppet. And so this Kamal guy, he's freed by the vizier, but told fuck off, right? He's sent into exile. And he goes off into exile. He goes into the middle of the desert. He has this spiritual experience, and then he goes and travels to where did he go? He goes Aleppo, I think, and he becomes a Sufi. He becomes a Sufi and then spends the next 10, 15 years training as a Sufi until he's a Sufi master. And then he receives a vision that he has to return to the Seljuk lands. And along the way, which he spent most of it in the desert, he ran into another guy from the Sultanate who was this former slave, the slave warrior named Mahmud Anasoglu, who was the complete badass, right? Like the Conan type guy, right? And Mahmud Anasoglu, when the previous vizier died, he said that he was told, well, you know what, you're free now, because that was a custom. When the master died, a lot of the slaves were freed, and the ones that had performed really well were freed even more so. But they essentially didn't want to give him any office or anything, so they freed him, and then he had nothing to do, and so he left also. And in the sands of Syria, he ends up meeting Kamal. And he decides to swear that he's going to protect Kamal and watch over him, and becomes essentially his bodyguard, right? So you have this kind of Obi-Wan Kenobi figure, and then this giant badass warrior. This is all real. This all really happened, right? And then when Kamal has his vision, he goes back to the lands of the Seljuk, and he starts organizing a lot of his old buddies who were bureaucrats, and Oglu, who was originally from a Turkic tribe, like a nomad tribe, organizes his tribe and organizes the soldiers he knew from the time of the battle. And he gets them all ready with the idea of, at some point, we're going to free the young sultan, and he's going to take command, and we're going to be his army, right? And they don't know when that's going to be. But then the evil vizier is poisoned to death by his wife, Inak Khatun, who was the most scheming, brilliant, but horribly evil woman. Right? She was a bit like Livia, you know, in the Roman Empire. She was just unbelievable. She poisoned everyone that went in her path, you know, and she was doing all of it, just like Livia. She was doing all of it so that her sons would take power, right? Just like with Tiberius, you know. Inak Khatun was her name. And so she ended up losing patience with the vizier. He kills him, and you know, he was married to her, but her sons were from his older brother, who she also probably killed, you know. And the sons, she gives them the Seljuk territory as viziers over the territory. Well, one of them is her favorite, which is the middle son. That's a big problem too, becomes the vizier. And the other two end up becoming governors of the north and the south, right? The oldest one is the only one who actually knows how to fight. The middle one is this horrible, sadistic bully. And the young one is this incompetent that might have been mentally deficient in some way. Right? I don't know, but the two younger ones are basically Uday and Qusay Hussein, if you know what I mean. They're just complete wastes of human air, you know. But the player characters show up in the Seljuk lands at that moment, and then they go to Ray, and Ray is where Kamal and Oglu are, and of course Kamal is a Sufi, and he gets to have visions. So the player character is like, okay, we're going to look around. We're going to try to find out someone who can tell us, you know, exactly where the Sultan is. And so we're going to try to see. I'm like, well, okay, fuck it. This is going somewhere, so I'm going to run with this, right? And so they end up traveling around. They finally get to a tea house, and I tell them in that tea house there's this old Sufi guy with the blue robes with the gold fringe, you know, but poor coarse robes, just that have been tinted blue, which is It's the rows of the order that Kamal belonged to, and then this really large 40-something older warrior that looks quite dangerous, and so and then I have there's a cleric in the party, and I have Kamal get up, and he goes over there and he says, "You are the ones I have seen," and it's like, what? He goes, "You are the ones who will help me to rescue the Sultan," So it was just fucking perfect, right? It was perfect, and none of it was planned. It was all designed as in the structure of the sandbox building, right? And that's all you have to, as a DM, you trust the results. Unless they're unbelievably incongruous, which they can sometimes be. There are moments where the table can fail, right? But unless they're just completely out of whack, you trust the results, and then you fill in anything that needs to be filled in to let it smoothly look like a part of an organic living world. And that's the deal. And sometimes the organic living world can look like, Star Wars or whatever. Like, it can end up looking that way, because myth is an extension of nature, right? So that'll happen too sometimes. So it's fantastic when it happens in either way, right? I don't know. I hope that answers your question, Osiris. That is the way to do it. So you need to have the right mechanics, and so if you can either do that, getting somebody's book if they do good stuff like that, right? If you get Sword and Caravan and Wilderlands, or if you get Stars Without Number, or what was that one? The island, Kevin Crawford's book with the kind of Asian fantasy take. Anyway, that's the easy way to do it. The hard way is you make your own generators, right? Which you can also do, or they can be somewhat simpler. They can act as just like basic cues of generic things for you to do, but for you to do instead of deciding what a plot is going to be and running it like a script, right? That's the main thing. Let's see what else people have been talking about. 63 people watch. Well, thank you to everybody who's watching. I really appreciate that. And be sure to subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. And once we're done, share the video if you can. And definitely check out all of my products, as I mentioned just now, Sword and Caravan. And if you have Sword and Caravans, Wilderlands is really cheap. You can buy it on PDF or print from drive-through. And it adds some extra random encounter tables, and it adds it adds the stats for a Eastern dragon, for the Chinese type dragon. And it also has rules for generating families for characters that are from the Silk Road, and families and inheritance and stuff like that. But it's a little book, but it's a very good one. Let's see here. Says, I'm an old punk rock dude. So am I, man. So am I. The idea of paying for Hasbro approved shit is anathema. Yeah, it always was. E. Clark says, hail, shitlord. Thank you. Osiris says, I would love to see you make a cyberpunk RPG setting. Well, you know what? That's another one I had mentioned before, right? How this sci-fi setting for Star Adventure is something that I've noticed, right? that I've thought of doing. But I've also got an idea to do cyberpunk. Now, the problem, I've said this before. I know I've said this before. For some of you, this might be old news. The problem with doing cyberpunk is that I would not want to because it is actually ironically stupid. It's contrary to the purpose of what the genre was, right? The original cyberpunk was actually social commentary about that present moment in the 1980s projected into a science fiction-y context, right? And so if you then make your cyberpunk a version of like what cyberpunk looked like in the 80s, you lose all of that. There's no contemporary commentary there. It just becomes nostalgia for its own sake, right? It actually becomes instead of being something that is revolutionary in the punk sense, it becomes something that is, on the contrary, it is reactionary to like going back to that which is comfortable, right? And that's not the way to do cyberpunk. You can't, that wouldn't be proper cyberpunk, okay? So hey, we've got a super chat from Wayne Brack, $20. Thank you so much. He says, because you almost convinced me to rely on tables. Well, it's about how the tables are, right? How you'd use the tables, right? I think if you look at stuff like, I mean, if you get my books, if you get Sword and Caravan, give it a try, right? If you've got, Dark Albion has them too. They're not quite as developed. My next book, Baptism of Fire, is gonna build even further on. It's gonna be similar to what I've just shown you from Sword and Caravan, in that Poland in the 11th century was this enormous empty Wilderland. So there's going to be tons of tables for you to generate Wilderland encounters. And then there's also going to be stuff for generating communities, for generating special types of groups or encounters. There's going to be a lot of that there that you're going to really be able to use as a resource if you want to run Baptism of Fire as a sandbox, as an OSR sandbox, and it'll build itself, right? That's what a good table does. I think the reason a lot of people don't like tables is because they have bad tables or they use the wrong tables, right? So like you want to have an encounter for what you run into in the middle of a set of wooded hills in a kind of Northern European environment, okay? That should be easy to do. But if what you have instead is a table of like just random and equal probability chances of getting 100 different monsters from the monster manual, that is not going to be a good table for that, right? It won't fit, right? The chances that your results will make sense are not good. You need to have generators that are built for the thing you want to check on. All right, so back to Cyberpunk, sorry. So if I was going to do a Cyberpunk game, it would have to be a Cyberpunk game that was a projection of the future, acting as a commentary on the present, right? So that would mean, by definition, that it would be by far the most political game I ever made. Not because I want it to be a presentation of my own politics, but because that's inherent to the genre. If it's not political, then it's not actually proper cyberpunk genre. The politics of the 1980s was a criticism of big corporations, fear of the Japanese takeover, fear of the falling apart of government being replaced by private interests having power, right? Most of those things didn't come to pass, just like it's quite possible a lot of things we fear right now aren't going to come to pass, right? But I mean, if you did a cyberpunk setting now, it would have to be about a future where we're basically run by the WEF, right? And where you can, where the internet can be used to hack your brain, and where a whole bunch of things that are free of government control are made illegal, and are not just made illegal, but it is implied that you're somehow an evil human being on account of them. That's how this sort of thing would have to work. So there'd be Chinese style social credit, right? The word white supremacist would just mean literally anyone who disagrees with the state. And corporations would all be working in like Italian fascist style complete coordination with the state back and forth, right? So the renegade elements would be people engaging in illegal 3D printing, a whole underground black market, crypto credit, stuff like that. That would be just basically the least of it, right? So the problem is I've made a point intentionally of none of my games are a political statement disguised as a game. And of course, if I did a cyberpunk game, it wouldn't be meant to be that, but everybody could claim that it was, right? Because that's what the vision of the future presents, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure you could get a lefty that would do a cyberpunk future version but I mean, it would just basically be the Handmaid's Tale or something, right? It would be stupid, right? Because that's not, you have to look at who's actually in power in the present. And if you look at who's in power in the present, that's where the projection has to be made, right? And I'm sorry, but religious fundamentalists are not in power anywhere in the present, If I did a cyberpunk game now, I'd probably add that like the southern cone of South America is suddenly the new economic, the enemy state, right? To like, I don't know, I'd probably said it in Vancouver or Seattle or something, right? And the enemy state is the southern cone, right? The southern alliance of Argentina and Chile and Uruguay and maybe Paraguay, right? And the southern district, right? And they're all they've all become ultra libertarian states that have like complete economic freedom. There's, you know, Mewe is on the one crypto coin note, and they're the last great hope for humanity or something. The game would be mostly people trying to help an underground railroad to get people accused of hate crimes down to South America where they'll be safe. Anyway, damn, now I might have to make that after all. All right, so let's see what else we have to say here. I want to run a fantasy world post Bronze Age collapse. Yeah, well, that is an obvious thing to do. I mean, it'll be pretty sword and sorcery, right? The first post apocalypse, really. Well, the first one that we have any kind of notion about, right? Really, the first one was that moment where there was like the human bottleneck at that point in time, but that was so long ago, right? Where there was only like about 10,000 humans left. And then they all got better. Osari says, as for a sci-fi setting for simulating a collapse, it would be that they used up all the fuel for effective space travel. Well, that is one possibility. It wasn't what I had in mind, but maybe I'm not going to share it now because probably someone will comment about it on the chat in a second, and then I'll say, oh shit, that was what I was thinking about. All right, potential future products. This wasn't really what I meant when I started about making like potential future products. My intention had been that I was going to I was going to talk about the next several issues of the Pundit Files, right? But I guess I am still talking about potential future products because they're all ideas I have in my head that I'm sure some of them I will eventually write. You know, maybe not all of them. I hope I can figure out how to do Sons of Heaven in a way that'll really work for me, but it's hard, right? Like it's a bit out of my area, my standard area of knowledge, right? So I don't know, maybe I'm trying to figure it out. Maybe I'll start it easy, like on a single world, or, you know, do it sort of like what Venture Satanist did with this Alpha Blue. I could start it with like a single planet or a star base or something like that. Not sure. I'll think about it. What else have we got? I'm way behind on the chat, so I'm sure there's a lot of very interesting questions that have been presented here. Retro Roy points out, this month marks the 50th anniversary of Dungeons & Dragons, January 1974. Huh. Retro Roy also says, Lion and Dragon is amazing. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. He says, I think you'll be striked for smoking. Well, I'm not. First, this isn't a video. This is explicitly it's not a video made for kids. And second, I'm not smoking. The only thing I'm smoking in this is tobacco. In fact, it is pure tobacco, or Argento Raíces. Literally nothing else. Kevin Malone, another $20 super chat. Wow, thank you so much, guys. What about an Arrows of Indra style book based on South American mythology? It feels like a setting that has yet to be explored in RPGs. Well, that's an interesting idea. And I guess you mean like the Incas and you know, the other tribal groups that were in South America. The thing is, I'm a historian, but a historian doesn't mean you know everything about every period of history and every culture, right? So I'm not an expert on. I actually am a multi-level expert when it comes to history, because I've instead of dedicating myself to a single field, like, you know, if I'd done a PhD and ended up being a professor or something, I'd have to ultra hyper dedicate myself to a single specific field. So I would also be a single area of history, right? So, I don't know, like early modern European studies, or China and the Song dynasty, or you know, the medieval, you know, something in the medieval period, not even just the medieval period. but as it happens, because first of all, I did a kind of I did a degree in history and then a degree in comparative studies of comparative religion. I've taken a comparative approach, and my focus means that I've had to look at social history of a number of different places, right? So I've studied, the origins of Indian religion very extensively, hence Eras of Indra. I've studied European medieval quite extensively. I also studied the ancient, like the Roman Empire quite extensively, but I haven't done one of those yet. And I've studied China from the context of the history of the history of the I Ching, actually. So from 1100 BC until basically the end of the Chinese Empire. But within that there are a couple of specialties, right? One is the history of the Zhou, right? The first real dynasty. The Shang were actually the first one, but the Zhou are when they become Chinese, really. And then the Song dynasty. And the reason those two dynasties are the ones I focused on is that the particular book that I'm a specialist in is created in the time of the Zhou, and then in the time of the Song is when the most significant advancements, when it's like there's the highest level of importance in that culture for that book, and it means that there's a number of great masters who ended up writing about it and expanding kind of the field of its importance. So I know those things, right? And I know, like, if you were to ask me to do a Mesoamerican RPG, if I had to do one, I would probably end up doing one that would be about the Aztecs, right? Or maybe the Maya, because at least there I know a little bit more. I still would have to do tons of research, right? Because I know about it because I did a couple of years of studies there for when I was an undergrad, right? And like it was like the archaeology thing, right? And I still probably wouldn't feel qualified to do it, but I could do it with research. And the Incas, I know even less. Like I don't know much more about it than the average layman, right? So I would not be the right person to do a South American mythology RPG. I could possibly do a pretty good Aztec or Maya RPG, but as it happens, there's already one that came out recently, right? Macuedel by the Basic Expert, who we have differences with, but what I've seen of what he hasn't sent me his book to review. What I've seen from the book, it looks like it's quite good. Like, it's very authentic, it's historically correct, and apparently he had the background to do it, or he went to the trouble of doing the research. So, I'm not going to put down the book just because I've got a difference with the author. So it probably that's already covered. Let's see what else we've got to say here. Timothy Shank says most RPGs have been sandboxed from the beginning. Well, at the very beginning, they definitely were. But later on, there are now entire settings which are made by people who never played a sandbox, right? And therefore, the settings themselves are designed not to be sandboxes either. Roy says, I already own Lion and Dragon, and I'm going to buy some more L&D and Dark Albion books. Well, I really appreciate that. So, check out, if you've already got Dark Albion, check out Sword and Caravan, check out Cults of Chaos, check out the Heroes and Villains of the Silk Road. If you guys like, if you like Sword and Caravan, definitely get that book. It has an expanded chronology. It has all of these NPCs that are the major characters of the Silk Road. But then it also, even if you don't really want to run Sword and Caravan, but you like history, I mean, that's a book of biographies, and they're all basically, I fudge it a little bit with the Veiled One and the Old Man of the Mountain, because you have to, because they're semi-legendary, right? But everybody else, it's history. There's no I don't make stuff up. It's what actually happened. And some of their stories are amazing, right? If you haven't read the biography of Bohemond One Eye, you don't know what you're missing. So that's well worth checking out if you're a guy that likes reading up and learning a little bit about history. I mean, all of the heroes of the Third, Fourth, and Fifth Crusade are in there, as are all of, Saladin and his whole family. Timothy Shank says, Sword and Caravan is huge. You could run a Silk Roads campaign forever. Well, basically you could. That's why I put a 30-year timeline in there, right? So you have lots of time to do this. My campaign now has been going on for what? It's definitely in its second year now, I think. Yeah, I guess it's in its second year now. And so far, they started in, so they started in like 1190, I think, or 1189. I don't know, and 89 or 90. And anyways, but now it's it's the autumn of 1192, and that's how long it's taken, right? Because although we skipped ahead in time of several occasions during the Third Crusade, which they played through, and the travel times on boats from when they went from England to the Holy Land, so that shortened it. But since then, we've basically been running day to day because they've continually been moving. They went from Acre, and now they're all the way in Ray, and now they're heading north to Tabriz to rescue Togrul, right? And my players are freaking loving it, right? Like they really enjoyed this campaign. Now, some players might not enjoy the campaign the way I'm running it, which is one where it's very open. They all get to decide whatever they do. But by default, it's kind of picaresque, right? Like they have with them an NPC who is a monk that is sent on a mission to contact all of the Christian communities along the Silk Road. And so that is an incentive for them to carry on traveling, but that doesn't mean they can't stop for a certain period of time if they want to somewhere, right? But it's part of why it's made for them to keep traveling along. But you could run a very different campaign. Like you can do one that is intrigues and battles. You can do one that's action adventure. And I mean, you can definitely do one where it's like that much closer to traditional D&D. And there are a couple of cases, 3 or 4 times in this campaign where it's like what's been going on is something that could have been going on in Greyhawk or the Forgotten Realms, right? So if you haven't looked at it yet, the newest issue of the Pundit Files is an adventure called The Dead City. And The Dead City is an adventure from my Sword and Caravan campaign. But you wouldn't need to run it in Sword and Caravan. You could run it anywhere where there could be a ruined city in the hills. Yeah. and basically that's it, right? It's like it runs very much like an adventure could run if you were in any fantasy world. So you guys should really check that one out. I think a good little adventure. It's easy to port into almost any setting, especially if your characters are in some kind of Wilderland area. And you can, if you wanted to keep having that kind of Middle Eastern vibe, it could obviously be set in like the Middle Eastern part of your setting, but it also can be very easy to modify that, right? There's no reason why the ruins of Haran could not just be like the ruins of some other ancient empire or something, right? It could just be like, it could have been the Romans, right? Who knows? There's nothing specifically culturally contextual that is necessary in the adventure that you can't modify, except that, the city was at one point run by a religion of wizards, basically, who worshipped, who worshipped magic, basically, right? They were heathen wizards. That's the one thing it has to be. That's that adventure. That's the currently out number 2 of the Pundit Files. And if you haven't been paying attention to my recent videos, the Pundit Files is a new PDF periodical that I'm putting out, only available on the Red Room store. Okay, so the Red Room store is where you can buy the Pundit Files. So far, the first 2 episodes, the first 2 issues have come out. They're coming out every 2 weeks. Issue 1 is Tables to Shake Up Your Campaign, which is a set of random generators that create world-altering events for your campaign. And the other one is The Dead City, which is the one I've just been talking about. I'm just going to paste here. There we go. I've just posted there the link to where you can get The Dead City. And it's while you're there, check out the rest of the Red Room's products on their store. It's a good deal for everybody. I just got the sales report in for the first month, and it's doing well. It's not doing probably quite as well as if it was on drive-through, right? But then again, the deal balances that out a bit, and so I'm happy with it. They're happy with it, and we're hoping that it'll build up as I put more issues on there, and that it will add to attention to the sales of their excellent products as well. See what else people are talking about here. Frank Destrosso says, Happy New Year. When is Baptism of Fire out? Well, last I heard from Mad Scribe, it is due out at the end of December 2023. So he still had somehow held out hope for that. I don't know why, but very clearly that did not happen. And I'm hoping that he's going to have a new date very soon. And as usual, and this is why people ask me about AI art, I'm like, good God, AI art can't get better soon enough, like immediately, for Christ's sake. So like, because always the delays, every single book I've ever written, regardless of which publisher it is, has pretty much been delayed. And every single delay has almost always had to do with the art, right? Because I hand in the completed manuscript. The writing is done before anything else. And then it's the layout, and the layout is the publisher's usually doing it. So usually the problem is the art. The only other delay that gets caused sometimes is with drive-through, right? Like they send a proof copy, and there turns out to be a problem, so you have to change it, or they say that something in how you did the PDF is wrong, and you have to change that, right? But usually that doesn't take. The proof copies take time because it takes you days or weeks to get it. No, not usually many weeks, but that takes time, and then you have to, until you get it, you can't confirm it, right? But the longest delays are almost always because of art. So as far as I'm concerned, I would if some publisher comes up to me and says, I just want to use AI art. It's cheap, and I'll make it look good, but it means we won't have to worry about artists. I'm like, yeah, fuck yeah, no problem. I'm totally on board with that. I'm sorry, but that's how technology has gone, and and if it solves the problem of having to deal with prima donna artists, that's something I'm fine with. So let's see. Ian Isle says, I just talked to an acquaintance who writes for the New York Times. She's nuts in a good way. All I said to her is, I want my state ID back. And it's crazy how dorks off the bus get free NYC ID. Okay. I'm not sure that's a bit of a deviation. PJ0555 says, do you like Brazil? Well, I would like to say, PJ, that I like Brazil in theory. Every Brazilian I've ever met is very nice. They're always very happy. Brazilians have this thing about the Brazilian accent. They sound happy no matter what, right? I can't imagine what like the Brazilian newscasts are like, right? Because they're going to be like, yeah, there was a crash in the Sao Paulo airport tonight and 750 people died. It's like that, like it's like, oh my God, right? Because they never sound, they never sound sad. And I'd like to say that I like Brazil, except that I've only ever been there on very brief stopovers, and it's only been Rio and Sao Paulo, right? Which is where the big airports are. So I don't know Brazil really well enough to say if I like it or not. I like Brazilians. In many ways, I like them more than I do a lot of Argentinians. Brazilians are not as snobbish, but I don't know them enough to say for sure. Jeff Adamo says, while playing Morkborg, or something I don't recommend you do, we were going through a dull spot while traveling between cities. So I rolled for a random encounter, dead body. I forgot my players had a scroll that could wake a corpse. Well, there you go. See, that's the sort of thing that makes stuff interesting. There's always a way, right? And like sometimes having encounter tables, so you can have an encounter table where you say, we have a section that just says no encounter. And that can be fine in some contexts. It can be especially fine if you're doing like a lot of dungeon crawling, right? Where I've always feel like adding superfluous, unnecessary stuff there is sometimes bad because, it can otherwise lead to a lot of confusion. But a lot of times I like having random encounters that, have a range. And again, this allows you to stack probabilities differently. So if you're doing Wilderland encounters, you do a D100 table, right? But you don't have 100 entries. What you have is you have varying amounts. So some entry, you might have a 1% chance of encountering a dragon. And then you probably should have a dragon sub-table, right? But there might be like a 10% chance, let's say that's a wolf-rich Wilderland, right? That what you encounter are going to be wolves, right? So most of the times the wolves will just kind of be staring at you, right? But if you're encountering wolves more than once in a row, maybe they're hunting you, maybe they're following you and waiting for their opportunity, right? So you can build on that. That's the way you do it, I feel. Jack also says, Pundit invents a subgenre for cyberpunk, Trudeau punk. Elle says, I was just thinking of Meatball and decided to check YouTube and found a surprise stream. Yeah, well, I only usually I notify at like the beginning of the day, but I was asleep at the beginning of the day. So this is short notice actually too, short notice and on the first. Wayne says pure tobacco house ad. Well, you see, if it's high quality tobacco, you really don't want it to have anything else. You don't want to have flavor in there, You want to be able to taste the tobacco. Elle says the basic Mexican is already doing South America. Is he? Because if you mean Macuaitl, that's Central America. Mexico is Central America, not South America. Mr. Pizza says, is this the voice actor from Phineas and Ferb? I don't know if that's an insult or not, because I never watched that show. I was too old to watch cartoons by the time it came out. Somebody without a name said, have you seen or heard of Aquelarre? Yes, I not only have seen it and heard it, but it was a major inspiration for Dark Albion and Lion and Dragon. Aquelarre is a Spanish game that must have been written in the early 90s, I think, or mid 90s at the latest. And it's basically the first real medieval authentic game as far as I'm concerned, right? It's set in Spain in the early 1300s, I believe. And it's got its own system, but the system is basically an OSR style ripoff of the Chaosium system, of the Call of Cthulhu system. But you play people from the Iberian Peninsula in that time. So you could be a Christian, a Moor, or a Jew. You're probably religious, but there are some people who could be rational. And there's magic. Magic is real and monsters are real. It has all the monsters of the Iberian Peninsula, which are, some of them are very weird. They're very freaky. I've come to discover that medieval creatures in particular are generally weird and freaky compared to the monsters that we can think up today. Right? Like it's actually, they tend to be in some ways way more strange than anything we could come up with, because it's something we wouldn't come up with, I guess. They have a system of magic. Now, their system of magic, my system of magic is based on how medieval magicians imagined that magic worked, right? In the 1400s or in the 1200s or whatever. In Aquelarre, magic is based on how the average peasant imagined magic to work, right? Which is a bit different, right? So, basically in many ways it's more demonic, right? But it's also like more fantastical. But anyways, that book was one of the first things, like that and Pendragon are the two major inspirations for Lion and Dragon. So that's definitely a big yes as far as that. Not only did I hear of it, I've run it, and it was, one of the things was me thinking I should try to do for England what Aquilari did for Spain, that led to me running my Albion campaign and then writing Dark Albion. Climbing that mountain says Ravenloft in Appalachia is a great campaign. that probably would be quite amusing. Would Strahd be a carpetbagger or something? I'd like to see Pundit do a more authentic Ravenloft-like setting. Well, that's kind of tricky. I mean, one of the things about Dark Albion is that Dark Albion is set, it's set during the War of the Roses, right? And the War of the Roses, 1453 to 1483, basically. And that exact same period is the period of time in which Vlad Tepes, aka Dracula, was fighting his wars against the Muslims in Wallachia, what is today Transylvania. And he was involved in all these conflicts, these regional conflicts, with especially between him and Matthias Corvinus, who was the king of Hungary, the absolute mad genius of a guy, and of course the Sultan of the Turks. So, I suppose I could see myself maybe someday doing a supplementary setting book to Dark Albion that could be set in Wallachia, and where, because in Dark Albion, of course, because it has that element of the fantastical, I actually have Tepes's later part of his career is as a vampire, right? So I have him come back as the vampire. So I could maybe make a campaign book or a campaign adventure sort of thing about that, right? And I could see that working as a medieval authentic version of that. The only other thing that you could do is something like Fairyland, right? Like the dark side of Fairyland, which I've done to a little degree in the RPG Pundit Presents issue Twilight Realms of the Fae, which is now also in the Old School Companion 1. So if you've got the Old School Companion 1, you can read that section and you'll see what I mean. It's like that's what the lands of the Fae were meant to look like. And you can have all kinds of strange and dangerous things there, and it's very alien. It's like you're in an alien and hostile world if you end up taken by the fairies to Fairyland, right? It's not a happy place for a human to be in. Oh yeah, hey, that's true. Judd Goswick says 64 watching only 3 likes. Show Pundit some love. I normally never pay much attention to likes, but he's got a point, you guys. How come you guys aren't liking the show? maybe you're not. I don't know. Anyways, if you like the show, hit the like button. Thank you. Let me see what else we got. My name says, am I late? Well, I don't know how you define late. We've been at it for an hour and a half now, but we're just kind of talking about a variety of subjects that have been brought up by the people in the audience. Let's see now. John Edgar says, Happy New Year. Love your channel. You mentioned Greyhawk, my old favorite. It doesn't get any love anymore, but given who's in charge of D&D now, that is a good thing. Yes. Anyone who has a setting, like I feel the same way about Mystara, for example. I get up every morning and say a little prayer of thanks that the people in charge of 5e D&D have no interest in Mystara, right? Because the worst news in the world would be if tomorrow they come out with an announcement that, oh, we're making a new D&D book. It's going to be Mystara, right? That's the worst. Like the people who are cheering about the Dragonlance fans that were cheering about the return of Dragonlance after what they'd already done with Ravenloft, like they're idiots, right? Like they should have seen this. They should have seen what a disaster it was going to be, Anyway, Scrooge McDuck says, hey, Pundit, I've been planning on picking up Arrows of Indra. Do you have any recommendations about which products I should get to go alongside it, adventures material, etc.? Well, the thing is, Arrows of Indra was a single book. I didn't do any adventures or other side stuff for it. I've been thinking of someday doing a second edition of Arrows of Indra where I would like update mainly just the rules. Like the setting book is great. Like, and you'll see in there, again, there's a ton of stuff you can use to build your sandbox with, even though it's much more primitive. It's one of my oldest books, right? So it's much more primitive than what you see in like Sword and Caravan, right? But there's a lot of stuff I guess you could interact between Sword and Caravan and Arrows of Indra, even though like Arrows of Indra is not actually set in the 12th century. It's set like technically it's set like sometime around 1200 BC, right? But you could use stuff from that in Sword and Caravan. And I guess you could use stuff from Sword and Caravan in there, especially if you're not too worried about like historical authenticity and are just looking for more resources, right? So if you want to get additional monsters, other powers, other things, the Sword and Caravan stuff, a lot of it could probably be put into there. Just like Arrows of Indra stuff could be put into Sword and Caravan, to wit, one of the Pundit issues that I'm working right now, one of the Pundit files I'm working right now, which is quite a few ahead still, right? And it's the one I'm just starting on right now, is Magic of the Kunlun Mountains, which is going to be a grimoire, I guess you could say, of Tibetan magic that was very, and the Tibetan wizards were very well respected in the eastern part, especially of the Silk Road, because they were known for being able to have incredible magical powers, but their magic was also known to be incredibly dangerous, and that's kind of what's going to be going on in that product. So yeah, I'm very happy that nobody at Wizards would know what to do with Mystara. Oda Manjiro says AI art would be pretty bad in historical games, never quite right, at least for the time being. Yeah, well, I do kind of agree with you there, right? But the problem is that a lot of historical art is bad. Like you have to know the context of the history in order to do it right. So like, the thing that has made it easy for Lion and Dragon and Sword and Caravan is that there's a lot of actual historical art, right? Like the art from the olden days that we can put into the book, right? But that can become harder in some contexts. Like for example, with Baptism of Fire, there's very little art from that early a period of the Middle Ages, and very little of it is going to like really fit well with Baptism of Fire, because you can't just put anything in there, right? Like you can't just take an image of a Teutonic knight and put it into Baptism of Fire. That would be 300 years too late, and it would also be German and not Polish, right? So that doesn't make sense. Whereas, when you're doing Lion and Dragon, you can put almost any French or English medieval art in there, and it'll fit. Sean Silly says, part one, since your ring looks Freemason and some of your other work alludes to Thelema and OTO affiliation. For audience members disappointed with that, can you make a statement you're personally against child abuse cover-up or ritual abuse, especially clarifying, denouncing a dark side? Okay, so I guess I could do that, yeah. Let me clarify, first of all. I am not and have never been a member of the OTO, all right? That's number one. Number two, I am a Freemason. Number three, neither Freemasons nor, to my own knowledge, anyone, as an organization, the OTO, are involved in any kind of child abuse or ritual abuse, okay? For the most part, from what I've seen, and I do know tons of people who are or were in the OTO, what most of the OTO is dedicated to is having parties and getting kind of high, while doing very little actual magic. They do in some places they do the Gnostic Mass, and which is the kind of thelemic version of the church service, but it's not really magic. I mean, it has a magical bit to it, but they're not really even like if you look at Invisible College, right? In Invisible College, I mentioned there that the first thing you have to understand to run an occult authentic campaign is that 90% of the occult world is crap, right? It's just bullshit, right? And you have to assume that 90% of all books on magic that you can find out there, 90% of websites, 90% of all people who are into paganism or Rosicrucianism or theosophy or whatever else are crap. Right. And there's only a small number of people who know anything at all. And out of those, a very small number of people who have really done serious work. Right. And most organizations are Freemasonry, most Freemasons would never say that Freemasonry is even an occult organization. And it isn't. It's really it's a fraternity. But they're also the keepers of the Western Hermetic tradition. Only 90% of Freemasons have no idea what that phrase means, right? And for 90% of Freemasons, it's basically a fraternal club. They have funny old rituals that they respect because they're old, but they understand some of it, of course. They understand the moral parts of it, right? So it's Freemasonry is a system of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols, and so they understand the moral values of Masonry, right? Brotherly love, relief, and truth, right? They understand the concepts of benevolence, of charity, and of generally being a good citizen, and that's kind of what they take out of it, right? Just like religion, 90% of Christians don't really understand Christianity in any meaningful way, right? So it's the same thing, right? And in any case, anyone who thinks it's really funny. I love saying this because it's true. Anyone who thinks that they join a Masonic lodge and discover the ancient secrets of magic or how to run the world are going to be really disappointed because they're going to find out that the lodge doesn't even know how to run a budget or how to organize a dinner. That's the struggle that Masonry is in, is to figure out how to organize the festival after the meeting, and usually half of the time it turns out a disaster. So these are the people that everyone thinks secretly runs the world. And so what I can tell you is that first of all, I am obviously personally against child abuse and against ritual abuse where it happens, which is, I don't know how one would define ritual abuse. I guess if you mean organizations that intentionally abuse children or institutionally, is super rare. But it can exist. It's usually in very fringe cults, and I say this as a historian of religion and religious studies expert. There are very few sects. There are, of course, quite a few sects where there is terrible abuses that happen at the time, right? Some of them are very small, like some of these groups, the family, or some of these Mormon offshoot sects, and some of them are quite large, like the Hare Krishnas or Tibetan Buddhism or the Catholic Church, right? But there are areas where these things happen, and then the institution tries to cover it up. And of course, I condemn that. I've condemned both the Catholic Church and the Dalai Lama, for covering up these abuses. So yes, I will completely denounce that. I don't know if there's more of what to say, about that. So carrying on, I don't know if I've gained or lost viewers from that. About the same. Everybody just wanted to see what I had to say about that. All right. Let's see. Kevin Malone says, in regards to cyberpunk-like setting, have you seen the show Arcane? No, I haven't. Sorry, don't know. Jeff Adamo says, Morkborg is perfect for me because I DM with a Bluetooth headset while I'm doing my job at the post office, LOL. All right, well, maybe that's a legitimate use of Morkborg, in as much as anything could possibly be a legitimate use of Morkborg. My name says, yeah, medieval creatures really are completely crazy. Not at all what we'd think of, yeah. But now some are more crazy than others. So I can tell you for a fact that, you know, a lot of medieval monsters are weird, right? But Slavic medieval monsters are weirder than most medieval monsters. So you're going to see in Baptism of Fire some truly weird crap, right? And, you know, it's really funny because as you know, I'm, you know, half Polish anyway. and you know, from my father's side, come from a Polish background. And I had always had this dislike of gnomes, which I extended into a joke, right? I did the Gnome Murdered RPG. I always, you know, go talk about how, you know, gnomes should never be allowed as player characters in D&D, and, you know, that I present in all of my campaigns ever, I've presented gnomes as these vicious little murderers, right? And that are also just creatures of pure evil, right? And lo and behold, I'm researching Baptism of Fire, and I come across gnomi, which are the Slavic version of the gnome, right? Because the German version of the gnome is the little guy in the red hat, you know, and like the German and West, right? It's like it's now been made ultra super cutesy poo, you know, in the context of the modern day, like lawn garden gnome, right? But even in the olden days, it was like, at worst, it was mischievous, right? And at its best, it was friendly and helpful. You know, it just wants to be a nice guy, that gnome, right? But you go across the other side, you get just past, you know, Silesia to the east of that. And in the Slavic countries, they knew the truth, right? The gnomes, as they appear, they're the gnomi. Well, you'll have to wait to get Baptism of Fire to see it, but they're basically what I always thought they were. And now I know why. It was a genetic memory. It was a racial memory of my noble ancestors fighting against gnomes in the dark places, you know? So there you have it. Let's see here. Israel Editation says, learn your Spanish, please. I don't know if he's talking to me. I haven't been speaking Spanish so far, but I do speak very fluent Spanish, to the point that it usually takes people quite a while when they're talking to me in person to figure out that I'm not a native Spanish speaker from birth, you know, that it isn't my first language. Bob Vegna says, I'm quite happy they said they'll never touch Dark Sun. Yeah, but they already ruined it in 4th edition, didn't they? Actually, they ruined it in 2nd edition by the end of it, you know, so there you have it. John Fraser says, I thought about doing a Mystara for my 5e game. Well, yeah, Mystara is great. But Mystara is especially great with the basic expert, you know, companion, master, immortal rules, or the rule cyclopedia rules. Right? Like, that's what it was made for. It's a setting that perfectly fits that set of rules. What else have we got here? Dicedale says, Freemasonry at its core is a religion, speaks to the nature of God and a moral code. Well, Freemasonry is without a doubt religious. However, it is a universalist religious movement. So by definition, it really isn't, which it got historically from Rosicrucianism, right? Like, the Rosicrucians were this movement that was born in the middle of, or rather early on actually, of the 30 Years' War. And it was started in continental Europe. It was some Germans that came up with it, which was basically, you know, the 30 Years' War was the war of religion, Catholic versus Protestants. It was the bloodiest war that had ever happened in Europe up to that time, and would, I think, continue to be. I don't remember if the Napoleonic War killed more people. the Napoleonic Wars rather killed more people, or if it wasn't until World War I. But it was unbelievably brutal, right? Like it would have looked apocalyptic, and the texts of the time, people were convinced it was the end times because of the brutality of that war. So during the middle of the 30 Years' War, some of these philosophers, Germans first, then French, then English, adopted this idea of that there needs to be the universal religion, right? Of the universal fatherhood of God, brotherhood of man, right? And the priesthood of all believers. So it was anti-clerical in a certain sense, in that it rejected the idea of the church being the intercessor between God and man, and it was an idea that faith had to be personal, but the central tenet of the belief in a true and living God Most High, that was the God of all creation, of all the universe, not the God of the English, not the God of the French, not the God of the Protestants, not the God of the Catholics, right? There's a single God, and that the purpose of man is first of all to love that God, and then to love one another as brothers of that, the adopted children of the mercy of that same Father God, and Freemasonry it basically was a descendant of the movement in England that descended from the Rosicrucians, which was called the Invisible College. The Invisible College were the creators of Masonry, and so Masonry has at its core this universalist concept, which is why to become a Freemason, you cannot be an atheist. You must believe in a supreme being. However, there is no condition as to what religion you participate in your belief in that supreme being, right? So you could be a Catholic, you could be a Protestant, you could be a Jew, you could be a Muslim, you could be a Hindu, as long as you accept the idea of a divine creator, right, and of a supreme being, then that's okay, right? So you can't be an atheist or be part of certain atheistic religions that sort of like Theravada Buddhism, right? You couldn't be a Theravada Buddhist because Theravada Buddhists say there are no gods, right? So the moral code of Freemasonry, it does very much have a moral code. It comes out of two sources, basically. The first and most profound part of the moral code of Freemasonry is the Old Testament. Okay, so all of Freemasonry's rituals circle around the building of the Temple of Solomon. Right? I don't think that is. I know for a fact that that's not a secret in the sense that I'm breaking any of my own rules telling you this, right? And I don't think it's something that most people aren't aware of at this point, right? And there is, I mean, there's a lot of Jewishness in that sense inside Freemasonry, in that it has a lot of the values that appear in the Old Testament, and a lot of the concepts and ideas of the Old Testament. And then the second is this kind of Rosicrucian Christianity, which embodies these ideas of a belief in the equality of all human beings, in the essential liberty of the human spirit, of the liberty of conscience, and therefore the liberty of speech, the liberty of choice, right, over your own self. And so, it has basically the beginning of the Enlightenment in there, right? Like there's a reason why Freemasons are the ones that came up with most of the Enlightenment, the political philosophy of the Enlightenment. The same people who started Freemasonry were also the exact same people that started the Solomon's House, the Royal Society, right? They're the same ones. Well, not the same ones who started, but like 80 years later, they were also the ones who wrote the Declaration of Independence. Right? So, these values, right, were the values of that descend from this Rosicrucian Enlightenment, and those are the moral codes, right? Is this belief in the equality of all human beings, a belief in in personal liberty, a belief in a supreme being, that there is something greater than you in the world, and that therefore you have obligations not just to your own self, but also to your creator and to society. Those are the basic values of it. But it doesn't become a religion because it doesn't have, let's say, its own scripture, right, or its own lecture. It has a ritual, but that ritual is of an initiatory practice. The correct description of Freemasonry is not a religion, but rather what you'd call a mystery school. So, like, you had the Oracle at Delphi. Like at Delphi, there was a mystery school, right? Or the Orphic mystery school, right? Pythagoras had a mystery school. And these were done under the context of the religion of Greek paganism, but they introduced certain esoteric concepts that were presented in the initiation. Anyway, that's what I'm saying. Judd Gossick says, my dad used to keep the books for his lodge. Can confirm they constantly had trouble balancing the checkbooks. Yeah, that's what most lodges are like. My name says pundit is of a certain ethnic background. I'm not sure what that really means. I'm Polish and Latino. That's my background. If by certain ethnic background you mean Jewish, I'm not. I don't have that particular honor. If I did, I would be very proud to brag about it. Sean Silly says, Freemasonry and cult suspicions, thank you. I always give the benefit of the doubt unless they're smoking gun proof otherwise. Well, I can tell you, you can trust me on this, right? Listen, because I know that some people say, oh yeah, but in the lodge, they do one thing, but then in like the highest degrees, they do other stuff. Well, I've literally, let me tell you that there is no degree where they do other stuff. I can confirm it, okay? And like, what would that even make? Like this idea that, okay, so like when this whole argument, because Freemasons have to deal with it all the time, right? And so you point out, well, in the lodge we teach this and this and this and this, right? So unless you believe that every Freemason is lying to you about this, right, or everyone that's talked about it is lying about this. And that it's actually like a complete cover-up, right? And that everybody who joins Freemasonry being told this joins in the cover-up regardless, right? Like this is stupid conspiracy thinking, right? So like the argument that they tried to make is, oh no, like in the regular degrees, they it's all normal, and then suddenly you're entered into the higher degrees, and that's where you're turned into a Satanist or something, right? And like. But think about that, right? Like, why would anyone go through those regular degrees and then suddenly, worship Satan in the next degrees, right? Like, it's just a stupid argument, right? Because how would not half of the people there say, no, fuck you, I'm not doing this, right, and walk away, right? And like it's just ridiculous. It's a ridiculous argument, right? And as someone who has the supreme degree, right? I can tell you it's not that, okay? Okay, so then Sean Silly's talking about Aleister Crowley. He's talking about one of Crowley's holy books that I read out in another channel. So Aleister Crowley's a fascinating figure, and he is he was one of the most, the second I started talking about Aleister Crowley, I temporarily flip off here. I wonder if I hope it's not that I'm running out of, oh no, I'm still good on battery power. All right. Sorry, you can all hear me, right? I'm still here? Okay. So Aleister Crowley was one of the greatest occultists of the 20th century, and probably the last several hundred years at least. You got to go back to about like John Dee to find someone as as impressive as he was. And he's a very profound thinker, and he's also a tremendous shit disturber, right? He's a guy who dedicated himself to what the Sufis would call the path of blame, right? He went out of his way to be a dangerous, mold-breaking iconoclast that was intentionally offensive to the society as it was, so that there was no way that what he was doing could be integrated into the current mainstream, because he wanted to break the current mainstream. He wanted to break the system, And most of the most revolutionary spiritual thinkers are like that. I mean, Jesus was like that, right? Jesus was a guy that, look at the accounts, right? They wanted to kill him because they saw that what he was saying was heretical and would destroy their establishment, right? Buddha was exactly the same way. When you think of Buddha, you're this super serene guy, right? That who could be offensive? Who could Buddha offend, right? But remember, Buddha was born in a Hindu world, right? And in that Hindu world, it was the world of gods, the world of spirits, of reincarnation, and you have to do good work with karma. You have to do offerings to the gods, so you'll be born in a better life the next time, and all this. And then the Buddha comes along after his enlightenment. He says, the gods aren't real. There is no soul. The good deeds will not really get you anywhere. The real purpose is to end the constant suffering of your incarnation by annihilating yourself. Right? So this is literally that's the equivalent of what a Satanist would say in a Christian society. In a Buddha, in a Hindu society, he insulted, and the caste system is bullshit. Right? He insulted everything they could imagine, and that's why in India eventually Buddhism was wiped out. Right? To the Hindus, Buddhism was so offensive that they couldn't allow it to exist. It was an insult against everything they believed in. Okay, so Crowley was a provocateur without a doubt. Right? Now, Crowley also has at this point, a very carefully observed life. Right? He kept meticulous diaries. He was famous for almost all of his adult life. There's records of everywhere he's been and everything he did, and we know all the actual bad shit he did, right? Because it's all in his diaries. He was very sad. A lot of it he would just publicize in general, right? And so we know exactly what he did and what he didn't do, right? So if you want to look at a really good, probably the best biography of Crowley is Perdurabo by Richard Kaczynski, but Tobias Churton has also written some very good biographies of Crowley, both of which they've done tons of research on. They're academic level works. And so you can know all about it there, right? And whenever Crowley is talking, and we know this, whenever he's talking about things like human sacrifice, this is the irony of it, right? That's an analogy for sexual magic. Right. So the play on words being that, to sacrifice a child means to waste sperm. Okay. A potential child. Right. So when he's talking, so if he'd ever, and the reason he had to do that was because the censors in the slightly post-Victorian world he was in, the Edwardian world he was in, would allow the publishing of a book that says something about human sacrifice, but it wouldn't allow the publishing of a book that says something about, having, copulating with a female partner for ritual purposes or ritual masturbation or something like that, right? That those books would be banned. Okay, so that's where that comes from, and that's all it is. And we know this because we've looked at it at his entire life, right? He's one of the most researched human beings from the first half of the 20th century. Robin is Old says, in Poland, if you meet a forest creature, you being a person of the drunken conviction, will see it as an omen of good things to come. Well, in Poland, there are a ton of really helpful spirits, right? Which I also talk about in Baptism of Fire. But most of those are kind of helpful around the home or helpful in the garden or things like that, right? And those are the good spirits. And the good spirits are are nice and probably mostly useless to adventurers. But the bad spirits, oh my God, like some of them are just so horrifying. It's amazing. Judd Goswick says, good time to mention that No Murder is one of Pundit's best games. It's a game, not a revelation of a real conspiracy. Yeah. No Murder is another product that I sold the rights to presses to, so I don't get any money for No Murder. But I do agree. It's not a good long-term game. It's a good party game. Sean Slay said, I wondered if you were Swiss-German Mennonite heritage. No, I'm not. I'm not Swiss-German or Mennonite. None above. What else have we got here? Still lots of people watching. Okay, we're already at the 2-hour mark. My God. My name says, I've just learned more about Freemasonry than I've ever known. Well, I'm glad I could be of help there. Okay, my name clarifies that certain ethnic background is from some joke from Northeast Ohio about Polish people. All right, so sorry. Sometimes when people say something, of a certain type, right? It's these guys that are, wanting to put brackets around a name to suggest that it's some kind of stupid, anti-Semite stuff. But okay, I'm glad it wasn't that. My name. Frank Estrosa says, I had a large occult library from Abermaline to Crowley to Carol, from alchemy to chaos magic. I always found at the core was Lucifer. All right, well, you can see it that way if you want to. That's not how the medieval people saw it, by the way, right? Like in medieval, very Catholic Europe, there was bad magic and there was good magic. And mainly what there was magic, and there was bad and good ways to use it, right? And that goes right up to the point of summoning demons, right? Like you see that in Lion and Dragon. Right? You can be a magister in the service of the Catholic Church and summon a demon, as no doubt Thomas Aquinas did, who was the disciple, after all, of Carolus Magnus, one of the greatest wizards of the Middle Ages. That you would summon a demon and you would bind it in the name of God and oblige it to do good works. And that was completely acceptable. Right now, if you summon a demon and you sacrifice an animal to it, and then you swear yourself to its service in exchange for power, that was a very bad use of it, right? And I guess that would be demonic, demon worshiping, or Luciferian, if you want to call it that, right? I mean, that's certainly that sort of thing. But that's the thing. That's how the thing goes for all of humanity, right? Like. You can worship God, or else you're worshiping something else. And that something else always ends up being, demonic, I guess you could say. It always ends up being, it ends up being worse, much worse than if you just worship God. Because you got to believe in something. Everybody ends up believing in something, right? Even if that something is trying to believe in nothing. And unfortunately, the stuff that you end up believing in the absence of the figure of a deity ends up being stuff that's going to be more harmful to you and to the people around you, or to your society, or to society as a whole, if it stops believing in something, than if you just had a belief in something. Right now, within religion, it doesn't matter which religion, by the way. There are people who can say they're believing in God while they're actually believing in something else too, right? Especially in mainstream religion, right? There's I don't know the exact number of Christians in the world today, but let's say out of 1 billion Christians, I'm pretty sure that 900 million of them have probably got something else higher on their list as a priority than the supreme being. And so that's a reality everywhere, right? And so it's not really about what you're doing on the outside, it's about what you're doing inside, right? Like, do you think because fundamentally anything that is a worship of something other than the supreme being ends up being in some way a worship of yourself, or a projection of what you want yourself to be, or something like that, right? So do you think there's something bigger and more important than you, or do you not? And is that something bigger and more important than you? Is it something that is just an attempted reflection of you, or is it something that is that you recognize as being beyond yourself? You know, and so there you are. Like that's the division. All right, and what that means to me, anyways, is like, you know, obviously there are religions that have a lot of better and worse features against each other, both in terms of structure, in terms of their society, in terms of their level of kind of coherence and development, and all kinds of other things, right? But that's also why fundamentally you will find, although the percentages may widely vary depending on the society, the state of the society, the values of the society that religion is in, and you know the kind of socio-political situation of that society. Numbers may vary, but in every religion there are people who can get it, and there are people who can't, right? And there are people who are screwing it up, right? So that's why after Jesus, it's almost 30 years of studying comparative religion, studying religious phenomenon of all kind everywhere, and esoteric phenomena of all kind everywhere. I define myself increasingly as a universalist, but very much a universalist who comes down to the idea fundamentally of the model of the single God, right? Of the Father God, you know, because that seems to be the best one. The Supreme Being. We've gone way off of RPGs here, but I'm betting a lot of you are finding this interesting anyways. Dicetail says, disagree about Jesus. You want to return to the origin and core of Judaism. Well, yes, in a certain way, yes. Okay. But also no. Okay, so let me put it this way. There is a lot about, like, if you're studying the Jesus texts, right, his own words in the Gospels and all that, there are many parts of it which are very, very, very Jewish, right, and that have been to some extent whitewashed out of Judaism, out of their Judaism, by Christianity over thousands of years. So you look at it and you don't think he's being very Jewish there, but he actually is, right? Especially the Judaism of that time that he was living in, right? And if you look at, for example, the Lord's Prayer, right? Our Father who art in heaven, that is an extremely Jewish prayer and very contextually Jewish to his time and place, right? So that is a very, very Jewish prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, et cetera, all the way down to for thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, right? Which is literally a Jewish prayer, right? So that is definitely a very Jewish part of it, right? His presentation of himself as the Messiah is also a Jewish part of it. Now, remember, this is a time when there were you couldn't run across, you couldn't go down a city block without bumping into a Messiah figure in that time and period, because it was a place of, like, there was the oppression by the Romans, so everything was building up, and it eventually exploded, not from Jesus, but in 69 AD, right? That was when the Jewish revolt actually happens. It was only a few decades after Jesus, right, that happened. But Jesus is also has a lot of influence from the world that he lived in, which included an enormous amount of influence from the Greeks. And but more importantly, within the context of the Judaism of his time, Jesus is revolutionary. Part of it was that he had some of these outside ideas. But what I was really referring to is that in many ways he was talking about going back to the most basic formula and breaking down the institutional rot, right? Like he was opposed to the Sadducees and the Pharisees, right? The Sadducees were the guys that ran everything at that time, right? And they had and they had some very weird kind of elements of their dogmatism that's very different from Judaism before or after. But beyond that, they had put this like centrality, the whole thing of the temple and their control over it, and it had become this very stratified institution, corrupted by power. That's what the whole money lenders thing was about. All of that, right? And he wanted to break that down to get back to the root formula, which is what almost all of these kind of great spiritual teachers end up doing at every point, right? They're almost never about overthrowing everything that came before. They're rather what they're usually looking at, and you see this with Jesus, you see this with the Buddha, you see it with Muhammad in a certain way too, right? Like that, because Muhammad, what he was claiming was that he was reforming the true religion of God that had already been revealed to mankind through the Jewish and Christian teachings, but that kept being corrupted, right? But at the same time, what he was saying was an absolute threat to the Christian and Jewish establishments of the time, to say nothing of the pagan establishments in Arabia, right? So it's always a revolutionary overthrow with the aim of returning to to creating a new version of the original intent. That's the way to put it. A new version of the original intent. You see this still in the, in some ways, Crowley thought he was doing that with this idea. Like he was also, he had a kind of evolutionary idea. He tapped into where a lot of other people did. It's since then become more common, and I talk about it in The Invisible College. The idea that humanity has a social and spiritual process of evolution, right? And he wanted to look at what is the next stage of how he didn't actually say there are no gods. He also didn't worship Satan. And he was very explicit about not worshiping Satan, how stupid he thought Satan worship was, right? He wanted to understand how we can relate to God in a post-Nietzschean era, right? Which is really the great question of the age, because nobody's quite figured that out yet, And there are a lot of other revolutionary teachers who have done that in the 20th century in the different contexts, right? Like Chogyam Trungpa was in a way trying to figure out that in Tibetan Buddhism, and you've got lots of guys. There's been a lot of that, right? So I wasn't saying that he wasn't Jewish. I was saying that Jesus was a menace to the Jewish establishment at his time. That's why they took him out, right? They're the ones that wanted him executed, according to the story, right? Let's put it that way. The Romans were the ones that passed the sentence, but we all know that he wasn't really he was enough of a threat to the Romans for them to worry. But there were so many would-be messiahs out there, and he would have looked just like any other would-be messiah to them, right? Like in the historical context, for example, John the Baptist was vastly more famous than Jesus was in his own lifetime, right? So, Jesus was very little known, relatively speaking, within his lifetime, compared to what John the Baptist was really huge, right? Like that we know this from historical records and from the developments that they're like followers of John the Baptist for hundreds of years after his death, right? That were not followers exactly of Jesus, right? They were literally just the descendants of the followers of John the Baptist, right? That lasted for quite a while. Eventually, Jesus overtook it, because Jesus, of course, became vastly more popular as time went on, but long after his death, right? So, but in Judea, he would never have been he would have been looked at as probably a medium level would-be messiah, right? Like John the Baptist was way more famous than Jesus, but that's the thing, right? And he remained more famous than Jesus for quite a while, in spite of, according to the gospel anyways, having basically endorsed Jesus as his pick, right? So there you are. Sean Silly is quoting Aleister Crowley there from one of the Crowley holy books. And yes, that is exactly, he's talking about jerking off over a sigil on an altar. Okay, that's what he's talking about there. That is what it's meant to be. And if he'd put that, he shall also masturbate wildly on top of an altar, on top of a sigil, and then that will create the transformation that he wants to achieve. He would end up having that book banned everywhere in 1920s Europe. Okay, whereas writing it as human sacrifice, it wasn't going to get banned, and he knew this, and it was pointing out in a way the hypocrisy of the system, right? John Edgar says, "Happy New Year, Pundit. I have to call it night." All right, thank you very much, John Edgar. I really appreciate it. Banned 3 dingoes. Okay, I don't know what's going on there. Let's see where else we go. My name says, you gotta stop doing these live chats on days I have to get at 6 a.m. the next morning, man. I'm sorry, I never know when to do them, but I do them when I'm basically free, and it's usually going to be 8 p.m. Eastern or later because I'm usually not free before then, or at least not awake. Let's see. Crowley got his book of the law from I was a phonetical. Okay, I see that one. You're saying I was instead of I am. That might be true, but if it is, he didn't even record it anywhere. Like he believed in I was, and he believed in I was as both a man and as a spirit. And this is the thing, Crowley. His first contact in I was when he was in Egypt. And at that time in Egypt, there was a Sufi mystical order that was called the City Isawa. Okay, and Isawa is an inverted, is I was inverted, right? It's a anagram, I guess you could say. And so, there are many theories, right? Like one of them is that I was some dude he just met. Another one was that it was not a dude at all. It was just a spirit in Crowley's head. It was just purely a representation of his higher self, so to say, his tutelary spirit, I guess you could call it, or holy guardian angel, as it's called in Abermillion. But there's also the theory, and I think this is a pretty good theory, it's one that I subscribe to, that while he was a dude, because Crowley was mad into all this stuff, right? He may have been initiated into the City Isawa, which was, like I said, it was probably the most legit Sufi group, still exists to this day in North Africa, right? And it was the most legit Sufi group he would have been likely to find there. And he was probably taught some very interesting things there, which, you can see references to it in some of his work, and he was probably sworn to secrecy about it. And Crowley did kind of tend to keep his sworn secrets. He would sometimes give them away in code and stuff like that. Like it was a little bit naughty, but he was pretty good with that, right? So I think that maybe I was a reflection of that, and then it may have been partly that, and then partly going on to be like his own mental contact to the concept of his initiator, right, of his guru. Maybe, but you can't know for sure. But anyways, there was never any reference. And Crowley, one thing he couldn't help himself with was to brag about how clever he was. So if he had intended it to just have I was be like I was instead of, God being I am, he would have eventually said it somewhere. He would have said it in his diaries, which he thought would not be read in his own lifetime, right? So no, I don't buy that. Someone talking about 7 Hermetic principles. That sounds like it comes out of some New Age book. I don't have any idea. There are no, there isn't a historical thing of there being 7 Hermetic principles. So I'm not sure where that came from. All right, so I think we've caught up now. I can't believe it. We're actually caught up. We're only 2.25 hours in. So I think I'm gonna, do you guys want to hear about what the next few issues of the Pundit Files are? Is that what you would like for me to do as like the closing part of this live stream? Yes or no? Anyone? Is anyone still out there? Okay, we hear a yes there. I mean, there are 73 people watching, so I'm hoping that people are listening. All right, sure. Okay, so just for you guys who have been my loyal followers and have been listening for 2 hours and 20 minutes now, my God, except for some of you who came in later, but that's okay, that's cool. I'm going to tell you about what we're going to have in the Pundit Files here in the next few weeks, all right? So let me just find the hell's the list? Oh, it's here. All right. So already out, issue number one, shaking up your campaign, which is a set of tables that you can buy right now. It costs $3.50. Every issue of the Pundit Files, unless something very special, like if it's super short, I might make it a free one or something. If it's like maybe sometime I decide to do a one pager or something, that might be free. Or sometime I might do one that takes up like 20 pages and then I might make it a little more expensive. But the default price of the Pundit Files is about $3.50. Okay, so I just need $3.50 from you, and you'll have the Pundit Files. So the first one is shaking up your campaign, a whole set of various tables for different kinds of world-shattering events that you want when you want to shake up your campaign in a massive way. Second one, issue 2, already out, is The Dead City, which is an exciting adventure that you can use in any kind of fantasy context where the player characters would be traveling to investigate an ancient ruined metropolis that is now in rubble. It's been in rubble for a long time. But possibly because they hear that there's a single tower in that city that may have belonged to the order of magicians that once ruled it, that is still intact and that no one has ever attempted to enter and survived. And it's very dangerous to go there. But so the adventure is the travel to the city, and then what happens in the city, and if you can get into the tower, and all of that sort of thing. And it's a good classic adventure, and you can run it almost anywhere. Number 3, which will come out in 1 week, I think, in the 9th of January should be the release date, is the Song Martial Artist class. So this is, in the Sword and Caravan, I made a class called the Sage, which is for like the Confucian, Taoist, or Buddhist Chinese wise man, right? Who knows a bit of magic. He has a lot of lore. Some of them know kung fu, right, of some kind. And so I included some combat styles in there. So the Song Martial Artist class is, again, ostensibly a class for Sword and Caravan. Really, it's a class for the Lion and Dragon system, but it can also be used in any OSR game, which introduces the class of the kind of wandering renegade fighter, right? The wandering renegade martial artist that first appears during the Song dynasty in China. That idea of the kung fu renegade, the roguish figure who goes to learn styles and fights with other roguish figures for determining who has the best gong fa, right? That whole thing begins in the Song dynasty. So that issue is going to have some details about the early history of the Song dynasty is where what we know of as like Chinese martial arts, they really just begins to develop, and the earliest things that are similar to the styles that we have start to develop. And so I talk a little bit about that, and then I present you the class, and I add, I think it's 4 new martial art techniques that somebody who takes that class can learn to be a martial artist in the Silk Road. So that sounds like something worth checking out, if you ask me. Number 4, so that will come out, when would that be? On the 23rd of January. Number 4 is going to be NPC generation. So it's going to be a series of rules and tables. Again, we were talking about sandboxes, right? And so in a sandbox, instead of carefully pre-preparing all of the NPCs that your characters will run into at precise moments of the plot, your characters are going around doing stuff and you might not know where they're going to go. Now, of course, you should have, when you're preparing the world, you should have the important NPCs laid out there, but they're going to run into a lot of other NPCs. And so the NPC generation book of Pundit Files, Pundit Files number 4, is going to be a bunch of rules and tables that let you very quickly generate an NPC, and from the basis of what you generate, you can flush out his personality and have a relative, and it'll have different degrees, right? So there's like the NPCs that you just need to know a tiny bit about something to hook onto so that you can express them, because they're just like, I don't know, this guy they bump into in the street or whatever, right? And then there's the ones that you need to flesh out more because they're gonna, you know that they're gonna be around longer. And sometimes the first kind turn into the second kind, and you kind of need some help with that, right? So that's gonna be full of tables to let you do that, okay? Let me see if there's any comments so far here. No, I guess that's so far you're all with me on this, I guess. And then number 5 is going to be the Silk Road City Guide to Baghdad. So you might remember in the RPG Pundit Presents, I did city guides of a couple of the cities in England. Bristol, I think, was one of them, and Hull was one. I did Kingston on Hull. And I did one for Exeter also. So this is going to be in that line, but on Baghdad at the time of the Sword and Caravan setting. It's going to be quite a detailed gazetteer of the city of Baghdad, which is, of course, one of the great cities of the period. Though at the time, it's a city that's also seen a lot of decline from its absolute peak, right? Like at its peak, Baghdad had more than 1 million inhabitants. By the time of the Sword and Caravan setting, it's only got about 400,000, right? So but it has a dynamic young new caliph who wants to get things moving again, and it's still got all kinds of like incredible areas, and it has the House of Wisdom, the great library of Baghdad, which is probably the biggest library in the world at that moment. So yeah, it's an exciting place to go and have adventures in. I don't know if I shouldn't stop there. Well, I'll tell you one more. All right. So number 6 is going to be siege rules for Lion and Dragon. Okay. And well, really, it's siege rules for any OSR game, pretty much, because you can certainly use, it's going to be modular siege rules. So I have rules for mass combat in the Old School Companion, and also in the Dark Albion book, in fact. But I don't have rules that are specifically for besieging a castle or a fortress or a city or something like that. And that works a very, very different way than a standard battle, right? It wouldn't work with the exact same mechanics. In Baptism of Fire, I'm also going to have combat rules, like mass combat rules, but they're going to be done very differently from the ones in Dark Albion, because they're going to be more reflexive of like the early Middle Ages, which were less orderly, let's say. But I never did a set of siege rules, and somebody commented about that to me at some point several weeks ago. So I decided, why not? That's a very good idea, actually. So that's going to be a book that's going to have a set of rules for how to manage a medieval style siege, and from either end, whether you're the defender or whether you're the besieger. And it'll have some very neat rules. I think you're going to like it. So those are the ones coming up right now. And of course, there'll be more later on. And I've already mentioned that the one I'm working on right now is about like Tibetan magic. So there's going to be stuff like that. There'll be adventures. There will be supplementary rules material. There will be monsters and items. There will be random table generators, all kinds of stuff that you're going to be able to find. And all of them will be about 350. So, Sean Silly said, it meant a lot for me to finally hear you answering my concerns. I'm a fellow 50-something Gen Xer. Happy New Year's. I appreciate the old lang syne one more time. All right, thank you. Well, I'm glad I was of service tonight. Let's see what else. Robin is old says that circular Baghdad map, can't wait. Yeah, well, but the round city of Baghdad was how it was built in like in the 9th century, right? So the round city still exists by the time of Sword and Caravan, but it's also now surrounded by a number of much bigger neighborhoods around it, and it's kind of in decline too, right? Okay, a couple of people are very excited to hear about a guest here for Baghdad. Well, I'm glad. I think it's a natural choice, right? Because there's, unlike a lot of the cities of the Silk Road, there was quite a bit of information for it. If I ever try to do like a guide to Nishapur, I'll just have to make a lot of shit up, because most of what we know about Nishapur is that it was an enormous city with like over 1 million people, and then it turned into a plain of ash with a pyramid of skulls, right? And that's it. What else are we going at here? Well, it looks like people are talking about 80s new wave, so I think that might be time to call it a night. I'm considering, you know, as soon as people go from punk into new wave, that's my cue to leave, you know. So I guess that's everything for today. Yeah, we've done 2.5 hours. I'm not going to keep going after this. I'm not going to try to milk it past its due. I think we've talked a lot of interesting topics tonight. And for those of you who watched until the end, you got to see the previews of the upcoming Pundit Files, so that's good too. Be sure, again, to subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. Hit the notification button so you get notified when I'm doing a live stream, right? Because you don't want to miss it. And you know, like this video if you like this live stream, so that helps the algorithm. And if you want to support me, be sure to pick up. Oh, I'm not going to sleep, Robin. Robin just said we beat the final shitlord boss. He will go to sleep before. I'm not going to sleep. I'm going to work now. I'm going to keep writing about Tibetan magic. Anyways, if you want to support me, please check out all my books. You can find the links to them in the description to this or any of my other videos. Check out the Pundit Files, which you can only buy at the Red Room store. Check out Sword and Caravan and Lion and Dragon, which you can get on DriveThruRPG. If you've already got Sword and Caravan, be sure to check out Wilderlands, and be sure to check out Heroes and Villains of the Silk Road. And again, thank you to everybody who came on, who shared the video, who liked the video, who did super chats, who's going to share the video in the future. I appreciate it a lot. You guys are always, the reason I can keep doing this. So my thanks to all of you. And I guess that's everything for today. Currently smoking. This is Nirab Poker plus Argento Races. So we'll see you all later. Take care. Let me see if I remember how to stop this thing. Oh, I think so. See you later, guys.